Thank you, Bethany. Appreciate that. Yeah, and thanks especially for the Parker Arts folks here, the sound and the audio and visual and all that. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you all for coming too. I imagine you all have a passion for garden. That's why you're here. And I'm here to help provide some education for that, answer questions, and provide a presentation on gardening. So I just had a show of hands. How many of you have a garden that you actively work on now? Okay, so most of you have a garden that you work on now. How many are satisfied with the garden that you work on now? Okay, there's always more we can do. And I'll tell you, when I first took the Master Gardener course, I realized a lot of the stuff I was doing was wrong. And it's just something that I had learned, from family, from growing up, and commercials on TV and stuff like that. But they were wrong. And I'll go through some of those things today, and hopefully you'll pick up on some of these as well. Hope you don't mind. I'm going to be moving around a little bit. I find it easier to do that. But I'm going to be talking about a drought-resistant garden. First, a little bit about Colorado State University Extension. Douglas County, each of the counties have got an extension office. It's a joint program with the USDA, Department of Agriculture, Colorado State University, and Colorado counties. And the reason why we do it and why they fund it is because if we provide education for people on gardening, it could help with water conservation, it could help prevent invasive species, it could help the broader ecosystem, it could do lots of benefits for the community, which is why these organizations fund this program. And this is just if you want to get some advice. There is and I think there are magnets and other things outside on the table where you can take with you, and you could call a help desk and get a Master Gardener on the phone or by email. So let's start talking about what drought is. So what is drought? So drought, by definition, is a lack of precipitation, right? We all know that. But drought recurs a lot in Colorado. In fact, every 9 out of 10 years, we get what's called a short-term drought. That's about 3 months. 3-month drought. But long-term drought, that's one that lasts several years. It has occurred 7 times since 1893. So Colorado gets droughts often, and big ones sometimes as well. But the annual precipitation for the state of Colorado is just 17 inches of rain a year. And you talk about the Midwest or the East Coast, and they would laugh at that. They get 40, 50 inches of rain a year. We get 17 inches of rain a year. Douglas County only gets 14 inches of rain a year. So if you think about it, if we're in a drought and we get one every 9 out of 10 years, we're going to get less than 14 inches of rain a year. The U.S. Geological Survey defines deserts as extremely arid, where it gets no rainfall, arid, where it gets 10 inches of rainfall, or grassland or steppes, semi-arid, it gets 19 inches of rainfall. So by any definition, what we get in Colorado is a desert. We live in a desert. That's where we live. Why would we want to grow plants that are not sustainable in a desert environment? Because that's where we live. This is a NASA satellite, and it measures soil moisture in the soil. This is kind of interesting. I want to point this. This is oops, daisy, wrong one. This is an anomaly here. It's not an anomaly. It's actually what happened. This should look like this. It should be very, very dry. But do you all remember, this was the date when this was taken was in August. You remember the Burning Man and all the rain they had in Utah and Nevada? That's what that is. They got those several inches of rain that they did not expect. Otherwise, it would look like this. And this is typically what this is. So you can see Colorado right here in the Front Range. Our soil moisture is very, very low. So we talked a bit about the past. We know we've had drought recurring all the time. We have major droughts last several years. So let's talk a little bit about the future. Right? So the future is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, this NOAA, has models that predict the temperature and the precipitation rates. So the temperature is pretty certain. We know that it's going to the temperature will rise about 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. The precipitation is much less certain. There's a low end of the model and a high end of the model. So it could be 5 to 10 inches higher. it could be 5 to 10 inches lower by 2050. If you think about 5 to 10 inches lower, that's pretty significant, considering we only get 14 inches of rain a year. So drought resistance. Let's talk a little bit about drought resistance. First, Bethany mentioned xeriscape. So xeriscape is a word that was coined by the Denver Water Department. It was also associated with landscape contractors of Colorado and Colorado State University. It was from the Greek word xeros, that means dry, and scape, meaning a landscape. So xeriscape does not mean rocks, all right? Xeriscape is plants that are low water usage. And we do have those. I mean, Colorado's a desert, right? And we have plants in Colorado that were here before people were here, or before the Europeans came anyway, right? And we had lots and lots of plants. So we do have plants that can grow in this kind of environment. And we're going to be talking about how to do that, or at least to recognize that and plan for that. The word was coined in the 1980s, and I don't know if any of you go back that far in Colorado, but there was a major drought at that time. It was one of the several years-long droughts. There was no snow on the ski areas. The mountains were bare, and the reservoirs were dry. And so that's why Denver Water met up with some of the contractors and CSU to try to figure out how do we go forward with this. And that's where they developed a xeriscape program. So if you go to Denver Water, they have the principles of xeriscape. There's 7 principles to xeriscaping, and they'll have them there for you. And they highly encourage you to follow those. I'm not going to be going through those principles now because you can find those on the internet. I'm going to be talking about things that you can do and plan for by season and that sort of thing. So let's talk a bit about drought resistance. Right? When we talk about drought, it doesn't just occur during the summer. Oftentimes I'll see folks in a hot, sunny day, and there's a brown spot in their grass, and they'll go out with a hose and they think, I'm going to turn this grass green by spraying it with water. That's the worst thing you could do. I'm not going to ask by show of hands, but ask by smile in your faces, how many of you done that on your own? I mean, I did it. You know, I said, the plant is wilting, I'm going to give it some more water. And the reason why is because roots follow the water. If you're going to water on the surface, the roots are going to come up to the surface. You want the roots to go down deep. So you have to plan for that. And if you're not doing gardening year-round, then your garden is going to have those brown spots. I'm going to give you some ideas, some techniques, some horticultural management things that you can do to avoid those brown spots in the summer. So we have to think about it year-round. If you try to squish your gardening into 3 months, it's going to take more time, actually, than if you gardened year-round. It's much less time. So drought resistance starts with the right plant in the right place. What does that mean? As someone asked a question here earlier, I made a comment, it does not necessarily mean a native plant. There are native plants, of course, that are already adapted here, but there are exotic plants, introduced plants as well, that can do well here. And we want to keep that in mind. But the one you want to not do is impulse purchases. Oops, daisy, I pushed the wrong one. Impulse purchases at the nursery, right? How many times have we gone to the nursery and say, oh, that plant would be so beautiful in my corner, right? And it dies because it's not the right plant in the right place. So you really have to think about that. And you want to ask the questions at the nursery. Is this the right plant for my conditions? And describe the conditions. You know, the soil. What kind of soil do I have? Is it clay soil, sandy soil? Is it on the sunny side, on the shady side? What elevation are you at? So these are kind of things we want to think about. Complement the larger ecosystem. That's really important because you've got a whole ecosystem out there. Even though Denver is a big city, sprawled out urban and suburban environment, right? We still have a broader ecosystem. And there are biodiversity out there that, because of that, we want to take advantage of that. Because of biodiversity, we want to minimize pathogens, viruses, insects that can harm our plants. And that's what the broader ecosystem does. And we want to then complement that. If you have your own micro garden all on its own, it might not do as well as if you had a garden that does complement the broader ecosystem. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into this. So grow plants native or adapted to the high plains desert. Doesn't necessarily mean native. There are people who say native is the only native, but you don't have to. That's your choice. And then horticulture is year-round. One thing I want to point out here is, if I don't advance the slides, more than half of non-agricultural water consumption is used for outdoor landscaping, and more than half of that is wasted. And I think I actually have a measurement of that somewhere, and it's the equivalent to, I forget what it is now, but it's like 2,400 Olympic-sized swimming pools or something like that. And it's a massive amount. And I'll talk a bit about the watering as we get into this, but these are the things I'm going to cover. So I'm going to cover planting, talk about the right plant, the right place, talk about water needs. You plant according to your water needs. It's called hydrozoning. We'll talk about that. Watering, want to water deeply and infrequently in clay soil. That means no spot watering. Spot watering is got to resist that because it's not going to help. And amending, when we talk about amending, when you add things to your soil, organic matter, compost, things like that, there's a lot of myths associated with that. I'm going to talk about some of the myths. Mulching, why and how to mulch. And some of the myths. Fertilizing, when do we fertilize? And some of the myths associated with that. And then I'm going to have some gardening tips on timing for what you do in the spring, the summer, and the fall and the winter. So planting, right plant, right place. Right? So one of the things you need to decide before you begin to choose your plants is, what do I want to plant? What's the purpose of my garden, right? What do I want? What kind of plants do I want in my garden? Do I have kids? Are they going to play out there? The type of plants you want or have in your garden may vary if there's going to be children tromping around out there in it, right? Native, do you want it to be native garden only? Do you want it to be for pollinators? That may vary, because then you want to probably choose plants for bees or hummingbirds, things like that, depending on what you want to attract to your garden. Pets and wildlife, do you want to attract wildlife? Do you want to deter wildlife? So you want to select plants based on that. And pets, of course, are really good at digging or soiling turf as well, so you want to keep that in mind. And then aesthetically pleasing, that's another option. Maybe you just want to have lots of color out there, you know, an artist's palette of color and shapes and things like that. So once you decide on the purpose of your garden, then you can begin selecting the plants for that. And if you've got a perennial garden now, you can change it if you want to. So that's not a problem. Trees, of course, are much harder to change. Those are high value assets in your garden, and you don't want to lose those. But perennials are easy to change. But you want to select your plants and make sure it's the right plant in the right place. Again, avoid those impulse purchases. It's easier to match the plant to your site conditions than to change your site conditions to match the plant. Again, select native or drought-tolerant plants, because we live in a desert, right? Know your budget and time commitment. If you don't have time for turf, don't put turf in. Turf takes a lot of time, right? It's a lot of fertilizing, a lot of mowing, a lot of management, and it can be expensive. Know your budget. What kind of plants do you want? There are inexpensive plants and there are more expensive plants. And there are things that low maintenance, high maintenance. You've got to take those things into considerations. And then, of course, know your soil conditions. That is clay, sand, perfect loam. We don't have good loam out here in Colorado like you do in the Midwest or other places. But know your soil conditions. And then be aware of microclimates. So what I mean by microclimates, things like elevation, wind, thermal heat masses caused by rocks, or if you have a stone wall and the sun is shining on it, that's going to create heat, and it's going to spread the heat around your garden. So I have a picture here of a microclimate. This is a map of Parker, and you can see the elevation variances. The low point in Parker is 5720. It's up by Pine Lane and South Parker Road, and a high of 6350 up in Homestead Hills. So about 300-foot rise, and this is supposed to be elevation, not temperature. So that's my typo, sorry. 300-foot rise in elevation accounts for about 1 degree drop in temperature. So if you have plants that you see in a nursery that might you want to have in your garden, one of the things you want to look at is what is the hardiness of it. And are you familiar with the USDA hardiness zone map? Okay, most everybody is familiar with that. The USDA, it's the Department of Agriculture, has they rate plants, they rate zones actually by the temperature. How low does a low get, average in a certain area, and we are 3, 4, and 5 in the Denver area, greater Front Range area. So you want to look at your plants when you buy them. If you're buying a 6 or a 7, then it's not going to fit in your elevation because it's going to be an annual. It will die in the winter. You want to get one that's fit for your zone. So that's why being aware of your microclimate is very important. Same thing as south facing versus north facing is also very important. Planting according to water needs. So different areas of landscape get different amount of light and wind and moisture. What you want to do is you want to plant according to the water needs. So for example, we have high water use plants in low-lying areas. The water flows downhill, right? That's where you want to plant your higher water use plants. And your the ones that are going to require less water, you can plant uphill or somewhere else. But you group them accordingly. You would not want to plant, for example, a pinon pine that does not take much water in a place that's all the water is flowing to. That pinon pine will die. So you don't want to do that. You want to match the plant to the conditions. So this is just an example of like routine irrigation, your vegetables, because they will require a certain amount of water in order to produce the vegetables you want. So that's going to require water. If you have berries and fruits and things like that. But you reduced irrigation, and there are ways to reduce your irrigation in your lawn. Most of my neighbors overwater their lawns. I don't. And then a limited irrigation for mature trees. Mature trees don't need much water. They're already established, so they're doing fine. Reduced irrigation for some shrubs and perennials that are established, and then no irrigation for native landscape. So then you have to know about the types of irrigation you want to use. There are different types of irrigation. Drip irrigation, soaking irrigation, sprinkler kinds of things. But you want to look into those kinds of things. So now let's get into the watering. I talk about watering. This is for clay soil. For clay soil, you want to water infrequently and deeply. Let's talk about this a little bit. This is a picture of how water flows in clay soil. So it flows horizontally by capillary action. So it moves sideways. And it's because clay soil has very small particles. They're very close together. So water can't flow down vertically. It flows horizontally through it. And so if you water on clay soil for more than, say, 5 or 10 minutes, it's just going to run off or evaporate. It's not going to do any good. So when you water on clay soil, you want to rotate. So if you have a sprinkler system of some sort of irrigation system, you irrigate for 5, 10 minutes, switch it off, then come back to it. Give it time to soak in, because otherwise it's just going to run off. Here's clay soil, sandy soil. Sandy soil has lots of pore space. So gravitational pull just moves it right through the soil. So in clay soil, you want to water infrequently and deeply. So you don't want to water very often because the small particles of water just stays right in the clay soil. Clay soil usually has lots and lots of water in it. That's not the problem. The problem is trying to get it down deep and let it percolate, filter down into where the root zones are. And that's where you want your roots to be, down deep, not on the surface. Sandy soils do not retain water because of the gravitational pull. So what you want to do with sandy soil is you want to amend it with organic matter. how does that work? So you put organic matter in the sandy soil. What happens is that it attracts microorganisms. Microorganisms and other things like invertebrates, earthworms and things, they have excretions. And the excretions bind soil particles together, beginning to form aggregates. That begins to form open up the pore spaces, but it also absorbs water. When you have the excretions in around the particles and they form aggregates, that becomes a source of absorbing water. That's how you get sandy soil to absorb water, by adding organic matter to it. And in clay soil, if you add too much water, it'll just cause runoff. This is an example here of too much water. So this is a tree root that came up. This is actually mine, my front yard, right? I was just watering my grass, but watering the grass was too much for the tree root. So when you see this, and how many of you have seen tree roots that come up to the surface? It's not for water in most cases. I mean, you have to look at the individual case. In most cases, it's for air, because it's in clay soil, it's saturated with water, it's coming up for air. So that's the reason for that. So again, infrequent deep watering encourages root growth and improves drought tolerance. So that's a really key thing. So let's look at the ideal soil, first of all. And then we'll talk about amending. Amending is when you add materials and you mix them into the soil to make plants grow better. So the ideal soil is about 25% air, 25% water, and then you got your mineral. Only about 3 to 5% organic matter. Not a lot of organic matter. We don't need a lot for plants. And you see the pore space. Good pore space, good aggregates, so you can allow the water and the air to flow freely through it. And the type of front range of soil we have here, particularly in, I say, development soil, is suburban, urban environments where tractors have come in and moved it all up and down, topsy-turvy, and squished it, compacted it. That's what this looks like. There's no room for air. So that's probably what your garden is like when the developers were done with it. And it doesn't have much air, and it doesn't have as much water, and so you have to do a lot of work on it to good. So one thing you want to do is to loosen the soil, amend it to create aggregates, and I'll talk about that in the next slide a little bit. But organic amendments is one of the best things you could do, because that attracts the microorganisms, and again, the excretions is going to help to form the aggregates. This is one of those myths. Soil amendments are not practical for large gardens. I'll just throw a bunch of compost out there, and after a year or two, everything will be fine. Nuh-uh, not going to happen. It will take years and years and years for you, massive amounts of quantity of this compost to be mixed in, for you to transform the nature of your soil. It's not going to happen very easily. And particularly if you have lime. We were part of a shallow sea at one point, so we had coral reefs. So we have a lot of lime. Lime is the basis of the binding agent in concrete. And if you have lime in your soil, and we have a lot of lime in we call it caliche here, the clay soil, then you're not going to change that. It's a very alkaline compound, mineral. And it's not, you can add as much as you want. The lime is just going to be in the soil. So you just have to plant the right plant there. Over-amending is a common problem. Trying to fix it in a couple seasons is going to cause more harm, because you'll add a lot of salts, excessive nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus to it. So how do we amend? All right. So again, organic amendments. We talked a bit about organic amendments already. Be judicious of manure, because manure has high salt content. When you see dogs that urinate on the grass and the grass turns yellow, it's because of salt. It's not because of acid. It's not because of something they ate. It's salt. And you can't get rid of salt. If you try to get rid of salt from a dog, the dog will die. Dogs need salt. So I know there's all sorts of people who advertise, companies advertise, we'll give you a diet for your dog and it won't do this anymore. I would be very cautious of those companies. But it's because of high salt content for the manure. But inorganic amendments are something different. You can add inorganic amendments to create aggregates. There's two that are very common on the market, vermiculite and perlite. Vermiculite is made from heat expanded silica, and it increases the pore space, but it also absorbs water. So if you have a very dry area and you want to plant something that you need have more water on it, you would use vermiculite, mix it in with the soil. Perlite is another one they use. It's made from heat expanded volcanic rock. It increases pore space, but it has low water holding capacity. So if you want to dry it out, then you would add this to the, and there are some folks who talk about adding sand and gravel, because gravel is an aggregate, and you can do that, and that will create pore space. But when you add sand and gravel, one of the things about it is it restricts root space. So you want to be judicious. If you want to have a cactus garden, something like that, that's not going to have a lot of root, then maybe adding gravel and sand would be the appropriate thing. But if you want to have a perennial garden where you're going to have the roots going everywhere, or particularly with trees, then you probably want to be thinking about sand and gravel. But that is an option for more of the cactus kind of things you want to grow. Okay. So amending, and we'll talk about some myths here. This is actually another one of my trees. This is girdling roots. That's what it looks like. When I talk about girdling roots, it actually circles the tree. I don't know what actually caused this because there are different causes, but one of them is too much compost. So just like roots follow the water, roots will follow the compost. So if you put a bunch of compost in right around where you plant, and there's lots of nasty clay soil where the roots don't want to go, they'll stay in the compost. But guess what? After a couple of years, the compost decays or decomposes, and there's no more compost. And then the roots are left circling. They need to radiate away from the trunk to absorb nutrients and water away from the trunk. That's what you want to encourage the roots to do. So by adding too much compost, and I know sometimes nurseries will say, dig a hole twice as big and fill it half as with compost. Master gardeners say, no, don't put any compost in at all. You want to dig a hole that's actually the right height for it and have it sort of like a saucer shape, going out about 3 times the size of it. So and the reason why you're digging at that size, again, is to create the aggregates. You're loosening the soil to create the aggregates, and then you fill it back in. Another reason for the girdling roots is planting too deep or too shallow. And the other reason is a poor soil-water interface. What I mean that is you may be mixing clay soil and sandy soil, and then the water, if it's going through clay soil, will go this way rather than that way. So, and if you have mixing soil, doesn't allow for free flow of water. You want to have whatever soil you have in your tree, you want well mixed. So it's just one soil type for the water to flow through. Here's some of the myths. You can change the nature of your soil by amending it. We talked about that already. Really can't do that. Or it would take years and years and years of amendments to do. Filling a planting hole, we talked about that already. Pine needles lower the pH of the soil. That's a myth. There are not enough pine needles, not enough of them. They're not that acidic, right, on the pH scale, that it's going to change it. And particularly if you have lime in your soil anyway, which is alkaline, it's not going to do that. Animal manure is always good for plants. We talked about that. Adding sand to my clay soil improves water retention. It does not. So let me just stop here for a quick moment to see if there's any questions on what I've been covering so far. Yes?
Sometimes when you get a tree from like a nursery, they say make sure that you've got it up high, like by 3 or 4 inches above the surrounding soil, so that it's mounded up, sort of. But
Yep.
You're saying proper depth. So
Yeah, proper depth. It should be right at the stage where the major roots at the top are an inch or 2 below, and that's where the first of the roots are starting. That's where you want to plant, an inch or 2 right above that, and that's where you plant it. So no, we don't want to mound it up, and that's something we suggest not doing. And there's actually, if you go to CSU website, there is and just type in how to plant a tree, and we'll provide that information for you. Okay. So mulching. Why do we mulch? Well, mulch helps to conserve water and improves plant health. So how does it help conserve water? It absorbs it. If you have organic mulch, for example, wood chips or shredded bark, it's wood. It absorbs water. That's a good thing, right? It retains soil moisture. It moderates hot and cold temperatures. You have a mulch on top of your plants, so when it gets really, really cold in the winter, we have some of those cold days, it will keep your roots warm. And it'll keep the ground cooler in the hot summer days, and that's a good thing. So moderate soil temperature. Reduces soil compaction, especially during those heavy rain or hail events or the snow. In compaction, we saw the small particles that, after they're done with the big tractors on your land, then that compacts the soil. That's really bad because there's no pores, no aggregates for your roots to grow. So this helps reduce that. It absorbs most of the weight, spreads it out more. Prevents weed germination. If you have about 3 to 4 inches of compost, weeds can't germinate. Microorganisms feed on organic mulch. We talked about that a little bit already. And then landscape fabric is not recommended. So landscape fabric myths. So it retains porosity, providing water, air, and air to roots forever. Landscape fabric lasts forever, right? No, it does not. It does not. It prevents all weeds from ever growing. No, they do not. Landscape fabric is supposed to be porous, but after a couple of seasons, all the dust and pollen falls on the little pores, little holes, clog it up. The weeds grow right on top of it. It doesn't stop the weeds from growing at all. Encourages healthy microbial and organism growth. It does not. We want to actually have the microbes have contact with the mulch and things like that you put on there. And then prevents erosion totally. I have seen so many places where it just eroded away and the landscape fabric is just torn to the sides. So, mulching, how do we mulch? So the best application of mulch is about 2 to 5 inches. Again, 3 to 4 inches is what you need to prevent weed germination. I'm going to talk about 2 kinds of mulch, pebble mulch and wood mulch. So we'll talk about pebble mulch first. Pebble mulch transfers heat better than organic mulch, that is the wood mulch. And if you see the chart here, this is the, organic mulch. This is temperature here. The pebble mulch is down here. So it does not get as hot in the summer. The wood mulch is up here. So it absorbs more heat. So the pebble mulch, actually, even though it's rock, it actually spreads the heat out, it absorbs more of it, so it does not heat up as much. It does not transfer as much heat. That's important. It keeps your crowns cooler during hot days. And it helps improve water filtration better than organic mulch, because organic mulch is going to be absorbing it, whereas pebble mulch will filter it down. But the good thing about organic mulch is it attracts microorganisms, and we talked about that a little bit, which is really important in other animal life. But we do need to turn it because it can get fungus on it. And squeegee, some of you may have heard of squeegee. It's a much smaller size, smaller than 1/4 of an inch, and it's more like a soil than a mulch. So you have to take that into consideration. It's not really a mulch at all. Yes?
So when you say pebble, what are you talking about?
1/4 to 1/2 inch size.
I'm sorry, what?
1/4 to 1/2 inch size. And you can buy them at nurseries. You can buy them at Home Depot. They'll be pebble mulch. They're already the right size for you. Fertilizing. When do we fertilize? Well, fertilize fruits and vegetables when you need to, because again, you're trying to produce a product of some sort, something to eat. So they have to be fertilized. Then annuals, you may have to fertilize annuals as recommended, and you want to look those up. Established perennials generally don't need fertilizer. If they're wilting, usually it's not because of fertilizer, it's because of a biotic or an abiotic condition. And you're going to have to look at that to see, is it infected with something, or is there an environmental condition that's hurting it? Fertilize the turf lightly, if at all, in the spring. I only fertilize in the fall. And I'll talk about the reason why in a little bit. Never fertilize stressed plants. If they're stressed, the first thing you say, oh, it must need fertilizer. That's the worst thing you can do, because what the fertilizer does is it takes all the energy from the plant and says, grow your crown, grow the top, right? The canopy. And that's the last thing you want it to do. You want the roots to really recover, because that's really probably where the problem lies. And so you don't want to fertilize stressed plants. Fertilize to treat the symptoms. So for example, yellow leaves may mean iron deficiency. So you treat with chelated iron. Okay, so, and this is just an example of what pelletized or slow-release fertilizer looks like. I only use slow-release fertilizer on my grass in the fall. And my grass looks stellar. My neighbors always ask me, how do you keep brown spots from appearing in the grass? I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. So this is what I'm going to get to now. This is the timing. So I'm actually talking about it now. So the spring, we want to promote carbohydrates. This is one of the main reasons why browning occurs in the summer. In hot summer days, we get all plants stop photosynthesizing, and when it gets to be a certain temperature, 95 degrees plus, whatever, except for things like cacti and things that are more adapted to hot weather. But all of your plants, we call them the C3 plants, the plants that we have here, are going to stop photosynthesizing when it gets a certain temperature. Plants that have a store of carbohydrates in them are going to have a better chance of being stress-free, stopping photosynthesis. Plants that don't have any carbohydrates are going to start wilting or turning brown. So what happens here? So, I'm sorry, I'm probably blocking your way here. So plants, when they wake up in the spring, they wake up because they have carbohydrates. There's nothing green in them yet, right? They're starting from brown stems or something like that. Your grass is just coming, reawakening. Your trees, your perennials are just beginning to awaken from being dormant during the winter. So they have carbohydrates in them now. That's what gives them the energy to start producing the leaves. Once they start producing the leaves, they start photosynthesizing. And as they start photosynthesizing, they begin to store carbohydrates. So one of the things that I know my neighbors do is they start fertilizing in the spring, because that's what the companies say. 4 times a year, right? Fertilize in the spring, fertilize in the summer, whatever. Do not fertilize in the spring. Again, the reason is if you fertilize, you're hitting it with a dose of nitrogen. It's like being on a sugar high. It's going to send all that energy to the canopy. It's going to grow the blades. It's going to look great for a little while, but it's not photosynthesizing at the rate it needs to. The roots are not going down deep because there's all the energy is being redirected from the roots to the canopy. And the canopy looks great for a little bit, but like a sugar high, when it wears down, then the plant's energy says, okay, I'm done now. And it begins to crash. And that's why you get a lot of the brown spots. You don't have deep roots because you've redirected the energy from the roots. Again, if you do this in conjunction with your deep and frequent watering and don't fertilize in the spring, or very little fertilizer in the spring, then you're going to build up those carbohydrates. When it gets really hot during the summer, your plants have a better chance of being stress-free or have lower stress than plants that don't have a buildup of carbohydrates. So, and again, the plants store the carbohydrates in the various parts of the plant. And we see that, right? That's how trees grow. They get bigger and they get wider. They're storing the carbohydrates in them. That's the carbon and things like that. Okay, so I think I covered this. So that's kind of a complex slide. I know I'm getting, let me go through a few more slides here, then we'll take questions. So timing, this is another one for seasonal gardening. This is on using pesticides and herbicides. It is you see this on all the packages. It's a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. That's EPA. They have the federal authority to enforce that. Of course, they don't. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to fertilize something that could harm pollinators. Bees have enough hard time as it is, so do hummingbirds. And flies are the second most prolific pollinator after bees. If you like chocolate, you got to thank flies, because chocolate is pollinated only by the chocolate midge. It's the only thing that pollinates it, and that's a fly. So you want to avoid pest-prone plants because you have to be dosing them all the time with pesticide. You want to do that. Don't do it during the day. You just read the label, and you want to know when to do it. So you never want to do it when the pollinators are out. Oh, and then become educated on prevention of treatment of insects like a Japanese beetle and emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is moving its way toward Parker. Then spring again, entice pollinators. Why wouldn't you want to? Again, it's part of the broader ecosystem. Your garden will benefit from the broader ecosystem if you make it part of that. If there's already pollinators out there, they will come to your garden. If you have something that is unique, you may not find them. I have people all the time who say, why put a plant out to attract a hummingbird? One plant. So hummingbird's going to come for one plant. Not really. Hummingbirds are going to come where there's a lot of food. It takes a lot of energy for them to fly somewhere. So if you want to you want to be part of the broader ecosystem, find out what the pollinators are there. And if you do really want to attract hummingbirds, then plant more than one plant. But you got to find out what's there. If you're living in a place where there are hummingbirds don't frequent anyway, why are they going to come to only your house? Maybe not. You want to think about that. I talk about birds they need a place to rest and nest. So kinds of things like that, the kinds of plants that you want to do. I have pinon pines, and I have Black Hills spruce, and I have nesting birds, and those are nesting hummingbirds, and I have nesting scrub jays in them. Really pretty to watch. And then prune is appropriate, and then you want to aerate your turf. So summer, so these are seasonal gardening tips for the summer. Add organic matter and top dressing. Top dressing is just something like organic matter, something you can buy at the stores, or just use some compost or organic matter. Leaves from the fall are a great top dressing. Don't throw your leaves in a bag. Use it as mulch somewhere, or mulch it in to your grass. It's not going to hurt your grass at all. And it will provide organic matter. Add mulch as needed. Remember, if you have organic mulch, it's going to decompose. Water wisely. You want to water your perennials and vegetables in the morning. Why? Because they photosynthesize. They need water to photosynthesize. If you water late in the evening, it's just going to sit there and they won't use it until the next day. Because they need it to photosynthesize. So best time to water is in the morning. Now grass is different, turf is different, because it's going to take time for the water to percolate down to the roots. So watering grass, you can water that during the night. Water always at the ground level. Water on leaves can lead to fungal growth. So when you water, don't spray, water at the ground level. Vegetables, particularly tomatoes, are really prone to fungus on the leaves. Prune is appropriate. July is a great time to prune dead branches because you can see what's dead. And July is a good time because there's not a lot of growth. Things have stopped their photosynthesizing. When it gets really hot, it's a safe time to prune in July. The other time is in the middle of winter when there's nothing, but it's harder to see the dead wood then. You want to weed, of course. Don't fertilize on hot summer days. And then mow to a height of 4 to 5 inches. That reduces water loss. So that's one of the big, I just see neighbors all the time mowing down 2 to 3 inches, and it looks great until it gets warm and they get all those brown spots. My grass is at 5 inches. I put it at 5 inches. I just mowed it down to 3 so that I could aerate it really, really well, but you keep it higher and it reduces the water loss. Fall, fertilize turf and aerate. Aeration is, you want to do that in the spring and in the fall. I just had my grass aerated. And this is when I do my fertilizing, and I use, again, the slow release fertilizer. It's a good time to plant after the hot summer. It's a great time to plant. The roots have a little bit of time to get established and to spread. And then in the spring, they should spring back to life. One thing about that, it does take a little bit of time to get established, so you will have to water, especially if you have, you buy native plants and things. They still need water to get established, and that's important. So I just took out all my front turf and just replaced it with xeriscape. But it's going to take 2 to 3 years for all my plants to establish, so I'm still watering it, but not as much as I was. But I'm still watering it. At some point over the next 2 to 3 years, I will reduce my water to almost zero. but you will need to water to get things done, and prune is appropriate in the fall. And the winter, this is when winter watering is really important. We tend not to think about watering at all. Evergreens, how many of you have seen the evergreens that have the brown spots on them? Yep, that's called desiccation. Desiccation is when the plant is using more water than is available for it. And most of the time in the winter, it's because it's frozen. That's drought by any definition, right? There's water there in form of snow, but if it's frozen in ice, it's a drought because it's not available to the plant. That's why these turn brown, because they're trying to photosynthesize, and transpire, but there's no water to do that. And so they're turning brown. So winter watering is very, very important. You want to water when the temperature is above 50 degrees. Never water on frozen ground. So if you have a place that's frozen all winter, it's going to stay frozen all winter. But usually we have enough days during the winter. Once a month is usually enough to water, and usually we have enough warm temperatures in our winters anyway that we can water. So here's a couple of things that do happen in winter. Frost crack and sun scald. You've seen these injuries in the trees. It's almost always south facing. The reason is because the tree is beginning to send its photosynthesates down from the leaves to the roots, or the water and nutrients from the roots up to the leaves, and it's sending fluids back and forth, right, on warm days, because we do have warm days during the winter. And then all of a sudden the sun sets, nighttime comes, and it just crashes the temperature. When it freezes, cells burst, and it causes the injury on the tree. That's why we see that's almost always south facing. So if you have a small tree, young tree, you want to use some sort of tree wrap. After a few years and it gets large and thick enough, and the roots, it won't need it anymore. But young trees will need the tree wrap for starting. But that's one of the things. Winter watering is very, very important. So this is my front yard. This is my side yard. This is dragon's blood. It's a sedum. I've got blue flax and other plants up there. Got some catmint, and it's spreading very nicely. This is my front garden. I've got all sorts of different kinds of things here, blanket flowers, penstemon. I got another pignon growing here. And I expect in about 3 years, it should be entirely filled in. And I do have, it would be over here, you can't see it, it's off picture, and you can see some of these plants here. I do have a mature tree there that I'm keeping, so I did not, when I moved the turf, I didn't dig holes to plant big plants. That's all ground cover. I put in mostly Turkish Veronica there. And then the ground cover will spread, and that way I don't disturb the roots of the tree, because I don't want to do that. It's a mature tree. So I think that is most of my presentation. These are plants adopted to Colorado. So these are, you can go to Plant Select. How many of you heard of Plant Select? Really good place to go and find your plants. CSU has tested these plants for this environment, whether they're native or exotic, and you can then find the plants for your garden. You can type in what you want: shade, sun, lots of water, little water, and then it'll spit out to you the answers. CSU has its website for recommendations on perennials. It also has trees and things like that to go to. So that's my presentation. I can go back. Absolutely. And I've got a few minutes for some questions if you'd like. Yes?
You mentioned the emerald ash borer that's being its way. It's in Honeywood's Ranch right now. But the recommendation is a root injection. So you have conflicting information there, so I'm not sure what to do.
The recommendation is it's up to the homeowner to do, because ash trees are high value. Any tree, a mature tree is high value. And if you have the emerald ash borer, the official stance of CSU is if it is in the vicinity and you know it's nearby and you think it might be in your growing season, that's the time to start treating. But you will have to treat for the life of your tree. So if you want to keep it, you're going to have to treat it year after year after year, because the emerald ash borer is not going to go away. It's going to be here to stay. unless by some miracle it does go away, then you can stop treating your ash tree. So that's the official stance of CSU is you treat it when you think it's in your growing season, when it's going to be in your area, and then you decide if you want to keep your tree or not. And then if you decide to keep your tree, then you have to treat it every year. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, I mean, because we have an ash, it doesn't have the borer at this time. But there's like this vaccination you can get
Yeah.
that's for every 2 years, but it is an injection.
Yeah.
So is that what you're saying for treating it, or that's a preventative thing?
Yeah, it is preventative. Yeah, that's up to the homeowner. We recommend be very cautious about that because of pollinators and things like that. Because when you do a systemic treatment, it's going to kill everything in the tree. That's just a consideration. But if you want to save your ash tree, then that may be something you want to do. So I'm going to leave that up to the homeowner on that, and you do your own research. Oh, you had another question over here, right?
I want to go back to mulching for a second. When you put it around a tree, I've seen both ways. People put it right up to the tree.
Yeah.
And then people make the ring.
Yeah, you don't want the mulch to be touching the tree. Again, because the microorganisms that you want growing in the mulch will want to go to your tree. And although most of them are beneficial, some of them are pathogenic. And you don't want that to occur. If they're pathogenic, it's not going to do anything to the mulch, but it will do something to your tree. So you relieve a little bit of gap between your tree. And you don't do the volcanic mulch, right? You've seen those where you pile the mulch up high? No, don't do that, please. 3 to 5 inches is enough to stop the germination and of weeds underneath it. But does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And I saw some other hands up. Yes.
When you fertilize so that the roots will grow. You want to fertilize now before freezing starts. And
Right.
it goes into dormancy, right?
Right.
And
Correct.
then same with irrigation. Now is the best time.
And, spring and fall, yeah, absolutely. Good time to aerate now. Early spring before it starts actively growing a lot, and then late fall. Best time to aerate. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, I kind of piggyback, I was gonna ask about the ash, because I just got mine, had a spa day,
Uh-huh.
and they wanted to go ahead, but you said if I get that treated, then any birds,
Not the birds, it's the other kind of insects that are going to be in the tree or on the tree that would be affected by whatever you're treating it with. So systemic is gonna go through the tissues of the tree, and any beneficial insects are gonna suffer the same consequences as the emerald ash borer, which you want to kill. So that's a personal decision you have to make. But ask questions about it. Say, it's a systemic, what will the systemic do to pollinators or something if you're concerned about that? Those are just questions to ask.
okay, and then also too, on her mulch one, you talked about saving the leaves. What about your grass?
Oh, for grass makes a great ground cover or mulch during the winter. Yeah, absolutely. You can put that over perennials and things like that. The one thing you want to be careful of on leaves, if they're diseased and you know they're diseased, don't use that as mulch, then you got to get rid of them. But if they're not diseased, then use that as mulch. Same thing with grass. If they've got some sort of disease in them, you don't want to use those as mulch. Then you just get rid of it.
Take them up in the spring, or do you just let it do its thing, just once you put it on there, you just leave it?
I'm not sure I understand the
Okay,
question.
so if I put my leaves or some grass now, going into fall?
Yeah.
In the spring, do I clear that out?
So I do two things with my leaves. One is I'll take my leaves from my mature tree in my front yard, and I'll take them to the backyard, and I'll mow them mulch them in, my lawnmower, into the grass. It provides a lot of organic matter over the winter, and I'll take any extra leaves I have, and I'll put them around my pinon pines.
Okay.
And so that becomes mulch during the winter.
Leave them.
Leave them there, and they'll just decompose on their own. Yep. Yes?
What about using pine needles as mulch?
Pine needles are great mulch. Yeah, great mulch. They take a little bit longer to decompose, but there's nothing wrong with it, and they don't lower the pH of your soil. They're fine. Yeah, the only thing is they might be stickly, if you go out barefoot on them. But yeah, It's like walking on pine cones, right? Little hard on bare feet. Yes.
What are some of your favorite ground covers? I wanna totally like replace my.
That's a personal preference. I have, there's lots of, you can choose that. I would go to Plant Select, and I use Turkish Veronica because it's very hardy, meaning it can withstand the very cold temperatures. It spreads well. It's very drought tolerant, and that's going to spread all throughout where my mature tree is. So, and I showed you that I have a dragon's blood, which is a sedum. It grows very well, spreads very well. It's great ground cover, but really that's a personal choice. And I was just showing you the techniques here. So, you have another question?
Yeah, when you were talking about that pebble mulch versus wood mulch, have you ever thought of blending the two to get the benefit of holding water and then retaining the heat too?
I don't know the answer to that one. I imagine because you're mixing them, you're not getting the full benefit of either one. Because again, the purpose of the pebble mulch is to filter the water through. If you've got organic matter there absorbing the water, it's kind of competing with what the purpose of the organic mulch is, and same, vice versa. Otherwise, I suspect. You could experiment. I really don't know the answer to that, other than by reasoning that it probably would. You won't get the full benefit of either one. But that's a guess on my part. If you find out, let me know. Other questions? Yes.
We have some juniper bushes and the bottom looks horrible, just brown. Is that because they're not getting enough water?
The
They're
bottom,
on the edge of the property, so the sprinkler's probably not getting them.
the bottom is brown. It's hard to tell from that. Like dead brown.
Yeah, dead brown.
And is it the canopy, the leaves part of it, or is it the actual wood branches that are dying?
No, it's the leaves,
Leaves of it? Yeah. Without seeing it or having more information, it'd be hard to tell. Juniper is pretty drought tolerant. What kind of juniper is it?
I don't know. It's
Okay.
not our yard, it's my son's.
Okay. Yeah. It could be water. It could also be an organism that's affecting it. It could also be because my neighbor has something very similar to that, and they have lining their yarn, their lawn. They have turf lining it. They have rocks. So then next to the rocks they have mugo pine. The bottom of the mugo pine is always brown. And I tell them it's because your rocks are heating up. They're big rocks. Your rocks are heating up. They're burning the bottom of it. And that's why it's brown. And it's never going to turn green because you've got this thermal heat mass baking your plant. And they say, yeah, but I like the rock. Well, then you sacrifice your tree. So that could be another cause, something like that. Could be an environmental cause. I don't know without knowing more information on that. But hopefully that helps a little bit. You might call the Master Gardener hotline, and then you can have a conversation with more information. Or if you want to talk more afterwards, we can do that too. Any other questions? I know we're going over time a little bit, but hopefully this has been helpful. Any other questions? Yes.
So I have what a visitor called a sort of ski slope in my backyard. So I have a real significant grade between the top of my yard and the bottom of my yard. And so I'm trying to figure out what options might be besides grass.
Yeah.
Because the grass doesn't stay green very well because of
Yeah, steep slopes, I would go to Plant Select, and you could put that in and find out about what kind of ground cover would do. There's lots of ground covers that will do just fine in that kind of thing. Steep slopes are not a problem. Steep slopes occur in nature all the time, and there are plants that grow on steep slopes. So you can find something. It just takes a little bit of you want to make sure it's drought tolerant, and you want to make sure it, hardy. It meets the requirements you have, but it will be there. I have a steep slope on my backyard, very steep, and I have some lavender, British lavender. So it's not a native, but it's some British lavender. My wife likes it, so we have that. I have some sedum, and I have some goldenrod. Does very well on the steep slope. So, and it holds all the soil in. So, other questions? Yes.
With the goldenrod, we've got some that we got from CSU Extension,
Huh?
In the spring, a few years ago, and it has spread really nicely, and my son has the same problem she's talking about. So I potted up a whole bunch should I try to get it over and plant it, or should I try to let it go over winter in the
Yeah.
pot, or what?
Well, if it's potted, you want to make sure you get it in the ground pretty quick before it starts turning cold, because otherwise it won't get established and it will die over the winter. So it's still safe to plant now, but yeah, I would plant it as quickly as you can.
What about bringing it in the house too?
If you bring it in the house, then it's like buying something from the nursery. You could do that. Now remember, it was outside, happy as a lark, because it was growing really well. With the environment that was outside, you're changing the environment. You're changing the site conditions. So it might not do as well inside. It's going to be different humidity, different lighting, different temperature. You're going to have to sort of think about that. So if that's one thing about transplanting kind of things, bringing them in overwintering is a bit of a challenge because of those changes. But if you do get into the ground now, this gives it plenty of time.
Do you know what the little white, tiny little white aster is that's got really full, pretty stems right now that's out in the rural areas? It's pretty big.
I'm not sure which one that would be. Lots of plants fit that description. Sorry.
Okay,
Use PlantNet.
okay.
You can find it. Any other questions? All questioned out? Oh, I was that good or that bad? Oh, thank you all for coming then. I appreciate it. And good gardening. There's some handouts out on the table out there. You can information on that you can take with you. So, but thank you very much.